Thank you. You know, with my colleague from Kentucky, we share so much, including those districts where actually the kids and the cows both live, right? And I have heard from numerous of my constituents in New Mexico, school nutrition administrators, you know, those who actually produce milk, and either dairy farmers that are large and some that are very small. And you know, there is very strong support for this bill. And because it expands the choices, I think, and there is a recognition of the need to get children to drink more milk, since the dietary requirements are better met if you're actually drinking milk. I love milk. I don't know who, but somebody brought me a little thing of milk. And this one will not go to waste because it's actually whole milk, and I love it in my lattes. You know, making sure that we get kids the calcium, the phosphorus, the protein, the vitamins, A, D, and B12 is really important. But Mr. Thompson, the bill doesn't adequately, I think, address the need for milk alternatives. It leaves it as it is, and it does cover the lactose. There is the Carter-Mace-Barragan amendment, which actually opens that up and provides more choice to alternatives so that you don't need to get a doctor's note saying, you know, I'm allergic to milk. Especially in New Mexico, we have a lot of Native American school children, and they may be sometimes lactose intolerant, and they just, to the entire thing. Do you support that bill, the amendment?
I don't have that amendment in front of me, but if it's the one that just basically goes based on parental direction, I have no opposition to parents making that call. If you know, maybe it's just my interpretation of the existing law. I think there's an opportunity for that already. Now it's maybe more cumbersome because
you're required to have a written statement of a medical authority.
That's the existing law. We didn't really address that. But if this if this particular amendment would open this up for parents to be able to, you know, to make that request, I have no problem with you know, parents being in that decision-making seat.
Yeah, and
I do trust once they try the whole milk, and especially whole milk and chocolate. If I gave that to you, it'd have been whole milk and chocolate. So I didn't.
Oh, no,
just
no.
for the record,
the problem with the chocolate.
I didn't provide that.
I mean, I think the problem, and I think that's why this idea of choice and looking at the nutritional, you know, in the school they are looking at these issues, and I'm hoping that they aren't serving the kind of milk that has the, you know, the highly sugared and corn syrup. I don't represent any of those corn farmers, so I don't need to worry about that. But the farmers and the dairies and people in my district are very supportive of this, and so I'm supportive of it. But especially adding that Barragan, Carter, and Mace amendment. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I like your bill as well. You know, to me, it gets back to choice. It's up to the American people to decide for their children what they want to drink. And government getting involved in this is an overreach. Now, if you really want to talk about obesity, like Thomas talked about, look at gummy bears. Look at the Mountain Dews. Look at the drinks that put the sugar in these children. Milk is not the problem. I've got, you know, in the 11 counties I represent, we had farmers who produce a lot of milk. Have cows, been doing it for a long time. They fully support this. And think it's wrong, again, for government to get involved with eliminating whole milk, which we've all grown up on. So I applaud you for doing it, and I fully support it. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Thompson, as you know, as you've been to my district, I represent the southern tier of New York, which is one of the top dairy producing areas of our country. The entire nation, including our nation's children, depends on the ability of our farmers to make ends meet and to get their products onto shelves. And whether it's in our grocery stores or in a school cafeteria, time and again, we've listened to the challenges that dairy farmers are facing, from regulatory overreach by this Biden administration to volatility in the marketplace. That frankly puts their survival at risk. in the changes to these dietary guidelines in such an unscientific matter, allowing so-called experts to falsely admonish milk, is certainly not helpful either. Chairman Thompson, if you could please reiterate for us once more, is the legislation before us today a step in the right direction towards fixing the dietary guidelines to be more representative of legitimate science?
Well, the legislation that I have before you today really is a reflection of the state of the art of science in 2023. There's no doubt about that. This is not meant, we're not here to refine and revise the dietary guidelines process. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen at some future date. These individuals are not elected. They don't. There's really no accountability. It's a small group of individuals, and it seems like if you just go historically over the decades, as I've looked at this, I mean, there was a time when eggs were demonized, a time when red meat was demonized, only to have science finally catch up with those opinions. And it seems most recently it's obviously been whole milk, despite the fact that whole milk is only 3.25% milk fat. That's whole milk. I mean, 1% milk is 99% fat-free, 2% is 98% fat-free, and it's basically 97% fat-free. And so that's just, but that percentage does make a difference in the satisfaction and the taste. The amount of, at least during my visits, and I'm proud to serve with Mr. Scott here, for 15 years now on Education Workforce Committee. And my visits to schools, the amount of unopened milk containers that wind up in the garbage can, the waste, the food waste, because it is just, because we do force some kids to take it. If it's free and reduced, that's mandated and comes as a part of it. And quite frankly, these kids are really voting on this issue based on what they discard, which is a real shame, because it's cheating those kids out of those 13 essential elements that are part of whole milk.
Well, thank you very much for your leadership here, Mr. Chairman, and your leadership as chairman of the Agriculture Committee, helping to create the next 5 years of agriculture policy in America and the work that you're doing on the Farm Bill. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, as we conclude on this panel?
No, just to say thank you for the opportunity to be able to present this bill. This bill passed with a good strong bipartisan vote out of the Education Workforce Committee, and with your support, look forward to seeing this bill on the House floor this week.
Very good. I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation and to reverse yet another heavy-handed and misguided Biden administration rule. I'm proud to yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, Chair. Thanks, gentleman. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is right.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank both my friends for coming in and congratulate you on the hard work. And my friend from New York was so thorough. I have nothing to add, so I would yield back. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia.
Yeah, I'd like to make a final comment. One was on the parent and the lactose intolerant children. That's something the parents are dealing with frequently, so I think that could be an area where a formal medical certificate may not be needed, but that ought to be a question to the experts to make sure we're not endangering children. I doubt it, but let them decide. There's a scientific process to consider issues like the likelihood that you'll drink the milk if you restrict it just to no-fat milk. And that is considered along with everything else as to what's best for the children. And that's considered by a distinguished panel of experts. And I say distinguished panel of experts because I agree with them. They're so-called experts when you don't agree with them. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman, for that clarification. So-called clarification. I do want to thank witnesses for being here today. I apologize for being late in deference to serious case of jet lag. I just got back from Dubai a few hours ago. I'm going to forego questions, and seeing no other members wishing to ask questions, this panel is excused.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for blowing me off for lunch.
So we'll call up our second panel, Representative Andy Biggs from Arizona and Ranking Member Gerald Nadler from New York. Mr. Nadler is running late, but I think it is okay with everyone if we proceed and begin with your testimony, Mr. Biggs. So thank you for being here today, and we welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here in front of the Rules Committee again. I'm going to discuss H.R. 357 briefly, and I do have a question. Are we going to do a separate panel for H.R. 6570, or is this the same panel, basically? Separate? Separate but equal. Well, 357, H.R. 357, a little bit different topic than 6570. But, yeah, so H.R. 357 will increase the accountability of policymakers in the executive branch. As we all know, executive branch promulgates regulations that far exceed the number of laws passed by Congress in any given year. In 2022, this disparity was 3,168 regulations issued by agencies compared to 247 laws passed by Congress. This astonishing statistic illustrates how much federal law comes from unelected officials in the administrative state instead of Congress. And under current law, some of the bureaucrats who initiate, enact, and enforce regulations lack direct political accountability. For example, one analysis found that more than 70% of regulations issued by the Department of Health and Human Services between 2001 and 2017 were issued by career employees. And at the FDA, it was more than 98% over the same period. This is not representative government working as it should. H.R. 357 would remedy this by generally requiring that only politically accountable officials, not career bureaucrats, initiate and issue regulations. This bill will increase political accountability in federal policymaking and restore the right of the American people to choose who governs them. I remember one of the most, two important things that I learned when I came in. When I went into one of the U.S. Senator's office for a visit and a briefing, he showed me the stack of bills passed by Congress, and it was like 4 inches high. And during the same 12-month period, he showed me the stack of regulations promulgated by our federal agencies and bureaucracies, and that was over 12 feet high. And that stark reminder has never left me. The second thing is the amount of actual criminal regulations that come out, not that they're criminal, but criminally enforcing regulations that come out is also overwhelming, coming from the regulatory agencies as opposed from this august body, and I think that's backwards too. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge the adoption and moving H.R. 357 to the floor. And I yield back. I'm sorry.
I think we're prepared to take testimony on the.
Yes, I am, but okay, all right. I am prepared to go with 6570. Thank you. I will be a little bit longer on 6570, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the Judiciary Committee favorably reported this bill by a vote of 35-2. This bill has overwhelming bipartisan bicameral support. The overwhelming nature of the vote was the result of months of bipartisan negotiations, and this bill makes the most robust improvements to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act since its inception in 1978. I am grateful to have been able to introduce this important piece of legislation with my colleague, the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, who's here just in the nick of time. So brief history for those, it might serve as just a reminder. FISA was enacted in 1979 in response to the revelation that the federal government had seriously abused its intelligence authorities and violated Americans' civil liberties through warrantless surveillances. Unfortunately, the federal government has similarly abused FISA and continues to use its broad powers to improperly spy on American citizens. Whether it was FBI Director Wray telling Congress that we should not, quote, lose any sleep over FISA applications, or former Director Comey calling FISA a top-tier FBI program, the government has insisted that we should not worry about warrantless surveillance. However, as we've seen in recent years, the intelligence community and the FBI have repeatedly fallen short of respecting the civil liberties of Americans. Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz has released several reports showing how the FBI violated its authorities and improperly spied on Americans. Inspector General Horowitz's audits investigations found that the FBI was plagued by, quote, systemic noncompliance, close quote, with its internal procedures designed to ensure accuracy. Special Counsel John Durham released a report earlier this year on the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation, where he not only bolstered IG Horowitz's findings, but also found that political and confirmation bias led the FBI to actually lie to the FISC court in order to improperly spy on the Trump campaign. So when I say FISC, that's referring to FISA court. The government has taken a tool designed to collect foreign intelligence and prevent terrorist attacks and has used it as a domestic spy apparatus. In 2021, the FBI queried the communications of more than 3.3 million U.S. persons. They queried more than 3.3 million U.S. persons. In 2022, the FBI was still conducting hundreds of U.S. persons queries per day. A recent FISA court opinion revealed that in recent years, the FBI conducted more than 278,000 improper searches of U.S. persons' communications. The FBI improperly queried a member of the House, a United States senator, a state senator, and a state judge, all without following their own internal proper procedures. The FBI searched the communications of more than 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign. Why? The FBI stated reason was that they wanted to know if the donors were being influenced by foreign adversaries. And on that point, I will come back to that point, and I want you to remember that rationale. We have to look at the U.S. persons illegally because we want to determine whether they were influenced by foreign adversaries. The FBI queried the names of hundreds of those present at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and hundreds of individuals present at the George Floyd protests in 2020. The FBI even queried those who came to its own offices, the FBI's own offices, to do things like conduct repairs, give reports. They were victims of crimes, and individuals that were providing tips to the FBI. To other agencies, I'll just give you one example of another agency problem. An NSA analyst searched individuals that the analyst was meeting through online dating services. That just gives you a history of the abuses. So for many years, many of us have been trying to reform FISA. We thought the Holy Grail would be if you could just get under 702 a warrant requirement when incidental U.S. persons were queried in a foreign person, foreign land database. That is what many of us have been working on for a long time. Many months ago, the Republican side of the House formed a task force, judiciary and intelligence members. I was the lead for the Judiciary Committee. We met regularly with the Intel Committee. We actually came up with some areas that we had agreement on. In the meantime, literally for years, outside NGOs and interested parties, from the ACLU to the American First Policy Institute, began working on reform. And many of those reforms are actually in the Judiciary Bill. In the meantime, literally for years, the Judiciary Committee has been having regular multiple hearings on reforms. We actually had multiple reform hearings this year, and I view those as a continuation of everything from meeting with DOJ IG Horowitz, the Special Counsel Durham, and other interested parties who came in multiple times to testify. Meetings were held with the FBI officials. I personally attended at least 3 of those meetings, one of which where they gave us a classified briefing on their purported reforms to prevent the type of abuses that they have engaged in over time. We had our judiciary markup last Wednesday, came out 35-2. The Intel Committee, theirs came out, I don't know what theirs came out. But violations such as the ones we've discussed make clear the need for reform. But the FBI and intelligence agencies have tried to scare Congress. They're trying to convince, who runs a better disinformation campaign than the intelligence community? And they're running one on this bill. They are trying to dissuade people and misrepresent what this bill does. The reality is we can protect our country and respect Americans' civil liberties. This bill, the Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act, ensures that the intelligence community can continue to collect foreign intelligence information and keep Americans free from harm while enacting necessary reforms to protect Americans from warrantless surveillance. This bill requires all intelligence agencies and the FBI to obtain a warrant from the FISA before conducting a query of a U.S. person. This warrant requirement includes exceptions for emergency situations when the subject of a query consents to the search or when defending against a cybersecurity attack. The bill significantly reduces the number of FBI personnel authorized to conduct search queries. That's something that both HPSI and Judiciary agreed on. This bill requires surveillance applications to include robust accuracy procedures, expands the ability of amici curiae to participate in proceedings at the FISC, and allows certain members of Congress to attend FISC proceedings, increasing Congress's oversight over the court. The other bill does not do those things. This bill is designed to protect Americans' rights and allow for our intelligence community to gather data from foreign adversaries in a timely fashion. We've provided exceptions. We've provided exceptions there to the warrant requirement. This bill also includes enhanced transparency measures and ensures that those who violate the civil liberties of Americans will be held accountable for their actions. We agreed with HPSI on the penalties, both criminal and civil. But I will tell you that in the very first provision, Section 101 of the HPSI bill, you negate all of those punitive protections. Why? Because you have put, and in Section 504 as well of their bill, you have put so many, expanded the ability to search so many people and query so many people that nobody was going to be subject to these penalties. Let's give you an example. In Section 101, which is kind of the keynote of what they're doing, of their bill, they say they're going to get rid of the criminal-only searches. Well, out of 200,000 searches they did last year, do you know how many fit that rubric? 2. That's not a reform. That's merely window dressing to suggest that they're doing something. Our bill also closes the data broker loophole to ensure that the government cannot make an end run around the Fourth Amendment to purchase the data of Americans. That passed out of Judiciary unanimously. Unanimously. And quite frankly, Section 504 attacks that provision as well. Section 504 of the other bill. That attacks that bill. Why? Because what they're doing under Section 504 is they're basically saying, we're going to now, instead of working with these major big companies like that have the ability, they have the software and all of the communications equipment, we're going to expand that. And by their expansion, what that does is it says, you broaden it so greatly that if you're a small business or a medium-sized business, you're going to, if you're the Starbucks that offers Wi-Fi, you're going to have to either stop offering Wi-Fi or reconfigure your system so you can provide to the federal government our data. You're going to have to do new hardware, new software. That's what their bill does. It's not really providing reforms. And the reason I'm spending time on that is because I don't think I'm going to have an opportunity to actually directly engage with my friends on that bill coming up. So when the FRRA says that they're going to limit abuses, and yet they expand the number of people and the equipment that's going to be necessary, they actually undermine the punitive measures that we take in place and the warrant requirement. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask that you would accept a piece by an attorney named Gene Scher called "The Trojan Horse in the House Intelligence Bill Would Force Your Baristas to Spy on You." I'm going to end.
Asking unanimous consent to place that in the record.
Yes, please.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I'll do the same for a piece by one of the current amici at the FISA court, Mark Zwillinger, and his article is entitled "House Intelligence Committee FISA Reform Bill Would Greatly Expand the Class of Businesses and Other Entities Required to Assist in FISA 702 Surveillance."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. So, I've hit on Section 101. I'm just going to try to reiterate just a couple of points without trying to belabor it, because I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I want to make sure it's clear. FRRA is in no sense a genuine reform unless your idea of reform is not to decrease warrantless spying on Americans, but rather to increase spying on Americans by the intel community with no accountability. And in so doing, changing and negating, quite frankly, the punitive measures that we have put in place in both our bill and HIPSI. Section 101 of their bill, which we can assume is a signature reform, they think, is to prohibit, quote, evidence of a crime-only query. And as I mentioned, it would only have affected 2 of 200,000 queries. Less than 1/1000th of 1% of their queries would have even been affected by this last year. Immediately, also, because of the exceptions that they put in there, the FBI can claim in every case that it is also looking for some terror threat or avail itself of the 2 immediate exceptions provided by the FRRA. The abuses that I have previously detailed would not be eliminated. Next is Section 504 of FRRA. This provision requires that anyone who has access to any, quote, equipment that is being or may be used to transmit or store such communications, close quote, must or shall be treated as, quote, electronic communication service providers, close quote. That's what we mean. It spreads it out, and now everybody's an electronic communication service provider, and therefore you fall and you get swept up in Section 702's general requirement to disclose Americans' personal communication data to the government. We will not be given notice that our information has been transferred to the government. So right now you have big companies like Google, Facebook, Meta, Microsoft, and telecom giants like T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. They're swept up in Section 702 because they have that equipment, that category. They fit the definition. Those communications to telecom companies already get foreign data about foreign people to the feds. But of course, Americans get incidentally caught up in that. But the FRRA expansion, which includes equipment, would cover small and medium-sized businesses that store data or provide Wi-Fi, a business landlord, Airbnb host, coffee shops, the airport where you go and you sign in. They would all have now a legal obligation because they've been to reconfigure their gear to give to government emails, text, or phone metadata, or they're going to have to stop offering those services. Big data centers as well will also have legal obligations to supply the government. Some analysts have called this, as I've referenced in one piece, a Trojan horse. My colleagues on the other side have also said that narco trafficking, we will not be able to follow narco trafficking, and that they're putting something in. But that's a cosmetic change. by creating a superfluous, unnecessary category in order to look like it's cracking down on narco traffickers. And I will, at some point, if I can find, I brought a whole bunch of junk so I can submit to you, to rebut what my colleagues say. But the point is, there are already authorities that exist now to follow narco trafficking. In fact, they do follow narco traffickers. And I will submit that document in a moment. As some analysts have concluded, this bill is the intelligence community's dream of expanded spying, provisions that nullify civil and criminal punishments for abusive spying, codification of ineffective or remedial measures taken by the FBI and IC, and broadening the scope of soon-to-be conducted warrantless incidental searches or queries of Americans. There are deceptive provisions. This all comes with an 8-year sunset provision. They want this to be extended longer than we've ever seen a Section 702 sunset provision be extended. And in the DC bubble, it is always de rigueur to accept or provide special treatment for members of Congress. The FRRA is no exception. It requires the FBI to get consent before it conducts a defensive query or search for a member of Congress. And that means all of your communications, texts, emails, phone calls. So they're going to give you a defensive briefing. But no other American's going to get that. No other American's going to get that. It's just us. The Judiciary Bill requires exculpatory evidence to be presented to the FISC when a Title I court order is sought by the intelligence community. This is the Carter Page issue. And the others, in the HIPSI bill, they say, oh, we take care of the Carter Page issue. They don't. Because they say if there's exculpatory evidence, the agency will give it to the Attorney General. And the Attorney General will decide whether they disclose the exculpatory evidence to the FISC. Do you think Carter Page would have happened under their version? The answer is yes. Because the AG is like it or not, under whichever side you're on, they have some political intuition. The HIPSI bill limits that notification. So my point is there is much to talk about here to go head to head. I think our bill deals with so many of these things. It's been an honor to work with my colleagues across the aisle. Ranking Member Nadler, former Chairman of Judiciary Nadler, has been key on this. Zoe Lofgren, Pramila Jayapal, and a whole host of our colleagues across the aisle have joined us in advancing this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have, but I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to testify today about H.R. 6570, legislation to reauthorize and implement essential reforms to the critical Section 702 program, and H.R. 357, a bill that would impose unnecessary requirements and undermine the regulatory process. One bill is extremely bipartisan and has my strong support. The other could hardly be more different. First, I will discuss briefly H.R. 357, the so-called Ensuring Accountability in Agency Rulemaking Act. This misguided proposal would ensure that the process of confirming nominees to administrative agencies is even more politicized and onerous than it is today, while also blocking the regular work of our executive branch agencies. This bill would require any agency rule promulgated under the Administrative Procedure Act to be issued and signed by someone who was appointed to their position by the President and confirmed by the Senate. This requirement on its face may seem innocuous, but it provides Congress with a weapon it can wield to prevent the ongoing work of agencies by blocking a president's nominations and leaving an agency without an eligible person to issue regulations. In the past few decades, the process for Senate confirmation has lengthened considerably. By requiring that rulemaking must be initiated and signed by a Senate-confirmed leader, this bill would make the confirmation process even more politicized, and it could give individual senators even more incentive to block nominations for the sake of a partisan goal. This would add unnecessary delay in the creation, promulgation, and implementation of critical new rules, rules that serve to protect the public's health, safety, and security. The bill's sloppy drafting also adds ambiguity to the process that could lead to years of litigation and yet more delay. To the extent that the bill's sponsors are concerned about transparency and accountability in the regulatory process, Congress already has many ways to exercise its authority over the administrative process. Unfortunately, this legislation is just the latest effort by Republicans to undermine the regulatory process, a process that protects our health and safety each and every day. Regulations ensure that we have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and safe food to eat. But this legislation could be used to stop this process in its tracks, putting our health and safety at risk. I urge all my colleagues to oppose this legislation. On the other end of the spectrum, I am proud to support H.R. 6570, the Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act, or the Protect Liberty Act. This important legislation is the product of a year-long effort that I was proud to join Chairman Jordan and Mr. Biggs in leading. Last week, we reported the bill out of the Judiciary Committee, not a committee known for its bipartisan spirit, with an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote of 35-2. We were able to command such a strong vote because the bill strikes the right balance between protecting our security and protecting our privacy. Over the past year, the committee undertook an exhaustive process of hearings and other consultations with stakeholders from the intelligence community and the Department of Justice, various government watchdogs, and a range of civil liberties experts. Committee members on both sides of the aisle came away from our fact-finding mission convinced that Section 702 is essential to national security and ought to be reauthorized in some form. They also realized that robust civil liberties protections throughout the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act were needed to protect our constitutional rights, while the national security apparatus continued its work keeping us, our constituents, and our families safe. For too long, FISA has enabled the surveillance of Americans without adequate safeguards to protect our civil liberties. No one disagrees that our intelligence agencies play an essential role in keeping us safe, but it is simply unfair to expect that the individuals who carry the grave responsibility of rooting out terrorist threats should also be required to make judgments about how to protect the constitutional rights of those surveilled. They need Congress to enact guardrails. This legislation answers that need. Time and again, the FISA court has found that the government overstepped in its use of FISA authorities. Nowhere is this lack of compliance more apparent than in the case of FBI querying of U.S. personal information contained in the 702 database. Although Section 702 authorizes only the targeting of non-U.S. persons who are outside the United States, we know that massive amounts of U.S. person data are swept up under this programmatic surveillance. We also know, from what reporting is available, that the government has a lot of this data, and that much of it could not have been obtained without a warrant had they tried to collect it directly. And even though there are some constraints on when the FBI can query U.S. person identifiers, just last year we still saw hundreds of thousands of non-compliant FBI queries, such as searches for 100 Black Lives Matter protesters and a batch query of over 19,000 donors to an unnamed congressional candidate. Clearly, the current protections are not up to the task of protecting our civil liberties. The single most important reform we can put in place to combat these abuses is a warrant requirement for U.S. person queries, and this legislation will do just that. The Protect Liberty Act will impose a probable cause warrant requirement on searches using U.S. person identifiers, with reasonable exceptions, such as cybersecurity cases, cases with victim consent, and in exigent circumstances. It would also significantly limit the number of FBI personnel who can conduct U.S. person queries, increase the types of cases where an amicus should be appointed at the FISA court, and impose much-needed additional transparency to the entire system. Although our bill passed through the Judiciary Committee with overwhelmingly bipartisan consensus, I know that our approach has its critics. Some say we have gone too far towards reform, and some think that a mostly symbolic warrant requirement, one that exists on the books but applies to no more than a handful of cases a year, constitutes meaningful reform. I won't repeat the criticisms of the HIPSI bill, which Mr. Biggs has effectively pointed out, but I want to associate myself with every single one of his comments on the HIPSI bill. We have struck the right balance here, and perhaps the only balance that can pass the House of Representatives at this time. A warrant requirement like the one imposed in the Protect Liberty Act is the reform we need to protect Americans and to allow surveillance laws to continue to keep us safe while also protecting our essential liberties. I have never voted to reauthorize Section 702. I am deeply uncomfortable, as we all should be, with the notion that it is permissible for the government to search Americans' most private communications without a warrant simply because they were aiming for non-U.S. persons overseas. I understand, however, that Section 702 authority has become increasingly important to our national security. I recognize that letting it expire altogether would not be wise. The Protect Liberty Act was written with that reality in mind. It is a balanced first step designed to preserve the underlying authority while curbing the abuses that most threaten our privacy. And, as Mr. Biggs said, it is vastly superior to the HPSI bill, which is a complete illusion and goes in the wrong direction. I urge all members to support this legislation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks both gentlemen for their testimony. I'm going to defer to the ranking member of the Rules Committee.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, Mr. Nadler, I agree with you on why H.R. 357 is a bad idea, and I hope that we can defeat it. But I will say that I agree with Mr. Nadler and Mr. Biggs on H.R. 6570. And I think it is important in a body where there seems to be no bipartisanship, that your efforts produced a 35-2 vote in the Judiciary Committee. We can't get, that kind of consensus on what to have for lunch, never mind on a bill like this. And I think there is growing consensus on the Democratic side and on the Republican side that we need to be very, very careful how we proceed on this. And I think this reflects that caution. And so I want to commend you both for your efforts. I know that Mr. Biggs, that the Rules Committee is going to adjourn at 5:30 for a conference, and I don't know what the hell you're going to decide in your conference. I would just urge you to do it quickly, so that we can meet here and report a rule out at a reasonable hour tonight. But I don't think people should ignore, the fact that you were able to come together. I mean, liberals, conservatives, and everything in between. Anyway, I appreciate your efforts, and I have no questions. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman for reminding us about the conference at 5:30. So, being mindful of that, recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Chairman Biggs, talking about the FISA reauthorization, you know that we saw under the Obama administration, the intel community and the administration abusing their power to target American citizens for overtly political reasons. How does this legislation protect Americans' constitutional rights?
So thank you for the question. So what we're talking about is you are using Section 702. They were using it as a weapon to spy. And so what we've done is when you put a warrant in place, Section 702 in particular is dealing with acquiring communications data for foreign persons in foreign countries. Invariably, there's going to be U.S. citizens' information swept up in there. They were using that and going forward on that. And we're, by having a warrant, we actually intercept that negative process. On the overall FISA, though, in Title I, for instance, by increasing, as Mr. Nadler pointed out, the scope of the amici to be appointed, you're going to have more assistance by the amicus process. But more than that, what we do that's really different than the other bill is we actually allow members of Congress to go in to any proceeding by FISC, so you can actually oversee and come back and report and make lucid legislative changes.
So, Mr. Biggs, it's my understanding that this legislation will both protect our constitutional rights with the process you just described, but it'll still help keep us safe from terrorist activity, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the way you do that is we provide exceptions. So if there's a credible imminent threat, and the analyst decides we have to go ahead and query so we can protect somebody, they can move forward. They've used the example, for instance, of a general who was protected by because of the use of 702 data. But what you could have done is you could have obtained consent, and we specifically make an exception through consent to get that information go forward.
What's the mechanism to protect a situation where somebody just views every situation as an exigent circumstance? What protection is there for that?
Well, you can get punished for that. You can have criminal and civil liabilities. The amicus is designed hopefully to be there, but also by having more legislative control. Plus the reporting requirements that I think every quarter. That's what we do. So there's more active reporting requirements, so we can see and follow up on those as well.
Thanks, Chairman Biggs. I appreciate it. Before I go on to HR 357, Chairman Nadler, do you have anything you want to add on the FISA reauthorization?
No, I think Chairman, I think Mr. Biggs has said it very well. The Judiciary Committee bill, by imposing warrant requirements and doing the other things we've talked about, protects civil liberties at the same time as protecting the security of the country. The HIPC bill is what's the word I'm looking for? Is an illusion. It doesn't protect civil liberties at all. And Mr. Biggs went into some of the details of why it doesn't. I'm not going to repeat them, but for all the reasons he stated, and I could add a few, it doesn't protect civil liberties, and it's an illusion. And in particular, an 8-year reauthorization. We have never reauthorized FISA for anything near that length of time.
Well, I just want to thank both of you gentlemen for all the work you put into this, and I think a lot of us appreciate it. I just want to hit on 357 before we move on. So to shift gears, Chairman Biggs, as you know, we're here in the middle of DC. It's one of the most liberal cities, if not the most liberal cities in the United States. Most of the people here work as unelected career bureaucrats. And because of that, there's a lot of bias in regulation. How does this legislation ensure that this bias doesn't damage our nation?
The idea behind this is so that the political appointee who is accountable through politics, through the Republican form of government that we have, to make sure that they'll have accountability. So when you start talking about, and I don't want to ramble on too much, but when you start talking about the bureaucracy, both Democrats and Republican administrations have expressed frustration with the ability to get things done because the bureaucracy itself has become the fourth branch of government, the administrative state. And we're now trying to say, just to initiate and sign off on a regulation, you need to have that political appointees, so there's accountability. That's it. We're looking for transparency and accountability. That's the nature of it.
Thanks. And in your remarks, you were talking about if you were to stack up all these regulations, it would be so high. Just to put it in perspective, from 2001 to 2017, over 2,000 rules were issued at the Department of Health and Human Services. Right. And again, that's by unelected career bureaucrats. The American people have no say in who they are. They're not accountable to anybody. Do you think that that's a threat to democracy?
Well, absolutely. And during that, by the way, same period, FDA, 96% of regulations came out from those guys, that dealing with those products. And so, yeah, it gets away from us as elected representatives. And this is trying to at least bring that back to some semblance of representative government.
Again, I appreciate all your work on this. I've got more questions, but for the sake of time, I'm going to yield back.
Sure, thanks, gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Can I just ask those quarterly reports that you just mentioned? Who gets those? The Judiciary Committee?
You're going to get, okay, remind me, Judiciary Committee gets some, HIPC gets some, and for both sides.
And the Senate, too.
Yeah, and the Senate as well. And they're coming from the IG and ODNI as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, and FBI. So we're trying to expand it so we get more reports more often. Mr. Roy wanted one on the minute, so it buzzed every time they issued a query.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania for questions.
Thank you. I would like to echo the remarks of the ranking member. Having been through the judiciary process, it was remarkable for the amount of bipartisan agreement, which is a little bit rare in that committee, but I do think it's an important way to address FISA, that we protect both our national security and civil rights. With respect to the 357, I think it does indicate a fundamental disagreement that we have about how we view the regulatory process, whether it's viewed as unaccountable deep state people or whether it's viewed as nonpartisan experts whose expertise often far exceeds that of members of Congress, and that Congress already does have a range of ways to exercise oversight and control. So I would not be in favor of that bill, but I am quite supportive of the FISA bill. And with that, I'd yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, Chair. Thanks, Gentlelady. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have to say, I really appreciate this bill getting after the rulemaking, because it's something I hear from constituents all the time. That's what they have the most problem with, is something going on in the department, rulemaking, and unelected bureaucrats like Mr. Reschenthaler talked about, making rules for things they've never seen. So I appreciate that, and with that, I will yield back.
Chair, thanks, Gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back, and the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Just to summarize here, we're talking about FISA 702, this program that we've seen, everybody admits, nobody's denying that it's been used to unconstitutionally, illegally surveil Americans using various different ways to exploit loopholes. And there's 3 proposals right now. One is a clean reauthorization, do nothing, stick our heads in the sand, and let this go on. Nobody's really proposing that, but unfortunately, that is getting added to the NDAA for 4 months to avoid, I guess, the program expiring. But let's set that off to the side, because we really have to address the long-term solution here. And there are 2 solutions. You're here to testify about the solution proposed by the Judiciary Committee. That's called Protect Liberty and End Warrantless Surveillance Act. I find it interesting that another committee has a bill to ostensibly take care of these problems. This is the Intel Committee, FISA Reform and Reauthorization Act of 2023. Before I get into the details of the differences between these 2 bills, I just want to comment on how unusual it would be to allow 2 different committees to bring 2 different bills to the floor. Isn't it true, Mr. Nadler, that the Judiciary Committee has primary jurisdiction over the programs that are being discussed here?
Yes, it is true that we have primary jurisdiction. Unfortunately, Intel, HIPSI, has intruded itself several times. When we reported a very good FISA renewal bill back in 2015, I think it was, HIPSI reported a terrible bill, and that was the bill that was adopted. I hope we don't repeat that.
Well, I went back and looked before that, and I asked the staff, who managed the bill when FISA 702, when this program was created? And it was actually Conyers and Sensenbrenner on the Judiciary Committee. So if the Judiciary Committee created this program, or the bill that authorized this program, then I think it should be the Judiciary Committee that fixes it. And
I don't think you'll find any disagreement here.
No disagreement on this. There may be some disagreement
The next panel, probably.
in the next panel, but there is joint jurisdiction over some of these programs. What I find interesting, it looks like the Intel Committee is trying to exert jurisdiction in areas where judiciary clearly has the authority to act. Like, for instance, the Judiciary Committee is responsible for the courts in the United States, the inwardly facing courts that deal with, the civil and criminal things of U.S. citizens, not spies. And so, for instance, this warrant requirement, if the Judiciary Committee clearly is inside of its boundaries, right, by putting this warrant requirement in, Isn't the Fourth Amendment part of the Judiciary Committee's jurisdiction?
Yes,
How
it
the
is.
courts operate with respect to American citizens? Mr. Nadler?
Yes, it is. It's clearly our jurisdiction, and one of the problems with this that we're seeking to address is that while intelligence on foreign persons makes a lot of sense, obviously we have to have intelligence on foreign persons, and obviously when you have that intelligence and you're listening to telephone conversations about people abroad who are targets of an intelligence inquiry, you're going to have feedback into the United States. You're going to have American persons in that. What this bill says is, in protecting the rights of American citizens under the Fourth Amendment, we ought to have a warrant to be able to query that that intelligence. I mean, there are a lot of specifics, but that essentially is this bill. And unfortunately, the HIPSI bill doesn't do any of that. In fact, increases the surveillance.
Mr. Biggs, do you have anything to add to that about jurisdiction here? Here's my concern. Okay, I've seen bills that are reported to 4 different committees, okay? And because the jurisdiction is distributed. But I've never seen us bring multiple bills at the same time from different committees and put them on the floor and have a beauty pageant. And we all vote, and you can like multiple candidates, and I think this would set a horrible precedent for legislating. Somebody asked me, well, don't you think this is fair to put one bill on the floor and another bill onto the floor? Well, I would say flipping a coin is generally considered fair, but it's a terrible way to legislate. Just because something might be fair doesn't mean it follows our rules and our jurisdiction. And under any procedure that we could dream up here in the Rules Committee, I don't think we should rob the authority of the Judiciary Committee, the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. That's where the staff, who are experts on the Fourth Amendment and proceedings of courts, that's where it resides. I don't think we should, in this committee, set up a rule that allows carte blanche, not just amendments in the nature of substitute, but just taking entire authority for an entire bill and from one committee and giving it to another committee by a vote of the House.
And Mr. Massey, let me say I totally agree with you, and I certainly hope that the Rules Committee will report out the Judiciary Committee bill, which is within our jurisdiction, and will not report out the Intel bill, which is which, if it were to do so, would set up this contest, which I agree with you is not the right way to go.
Mr. Biggs.
Yeah, so I want to make 2 points. First of all, Section 702 clearly is really the exclusive jurisdiction of judiciary. So any warrant that we are demanding, any surveillance or transparency with the courts, that's clearly under our jurisdiction. Additionally, everything else that HIPSI's trying to intervene in and get into was also referred to us. So quite frankly, I view that in some ways, while we've tried to play nice with Intel, that I view them as encroachers and interlopers.
Well, I'm told we're going to break and that I'll get to ask questions when we come back. But I'm not averse to a process where we would bring the judiciary bill to the floor because judiciary has primary jurisdiction over this. There's no doubt and question. The judiciary has jurisdiction over the issues that are going to be reformed, right? Where there is shared jurisdiction, these aren't necessarily shared with the other committee. But I'm not averse to bringing the judiciary bill to the floor under a rule that allows the Intel committee to offer amendments on the floor. They could offer an amendment to take out the warrant provision, for instance. I wouldn't vote for it, and you guys probably wouldn't vote for it. I don't want to speak for you. But it would be a process that allows them, if they believe they haven't had enough consideration already in the months of discussion that Mr. Biggs, I know you've been on a working committee with them, that you all have had, then you can have your moment on the floor. That would be my predisposition as somebody on the Rules Committee who wants to have an inclusive process, who doesn't want to leave anybody out of the process, but who believes strongly in the priorities or the rules and the precedents of the House, and that we shouldn't go willy-nilly about creating new precedents and bending our own rules just because a committee who has lesser jurisdiction, in fact, not the jurisdiction formed, wants to Bigfoot the other committee. So with that, I'll yield back. I know we got a break, and look forward to resuming this discussion.
And we will recess. We will resume this immediately after the conclusion of the conference. Mr. Nadler, my understanding is staff will be in contact with you. I don't think you're planning on coming to our conference.
No, I don't plan to come to your,
So,
I don't plan to come to your conference. I do, however, plan to go to the White House Hanukkah party, and I don't know what time it is.
without objection, the committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
think we're good. Yeah, yeah. Test for the stenographer. Test for the stenographer. 1, 2, 3. Test.
Committee will reconvene. The chair would like to advise the committee that we no longer anticipate further consideration of H.R. 6570 or H.R. 6611 as previously announced. With that in mind, does any member of the committee have any questions for the panel? And thank you both for returning on H.R. 357. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Chairman, taking a cue from my chairman and the ranking member, I'm going to yield back.
Ranking members recognized. Gentlelady from Minnesota. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Gentlelady from Indiana. Gentleman from New York. Oh, I'm sorry, gentlelady from New Mexico. Thank you very much for your testimony. My friends are excused. Okay. Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 1147 or H.R. 357? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Fishbach.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1147, the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act of 2023, a structured rule. The rule waives all points of orders against the consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Education and the Workforce, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report. May be offered only by the member designated in the report, and shall be considered as read. Shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally and divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent. Shall not be considered shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and the Workforce, or their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 357, the Ensuring Accountability in Agency Rulemaking Act, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of orders against the consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of orders against the provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary, or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. Finally, the rule provides that on any legislative day of the second session of the 118th Congress before January 9th, 2024, the Speaker may dispense with organizational and legislative business, and that the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved if applicable.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motions. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
I just have an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 16 to H.R. 1130, offered by Representative Carter, which amends the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Program to allow for beverage alternatives that meet the guidelines from the most recent dietary guidelines for Americans. Mr. Chair, Mr. Carter's amendment adds a provision to H.R. 1143 that would make available nutritionally equivalent alternatives to cow's milk, like soy milk, for students with dietary restrictions and other needs. This amendment would ensure that alternatives are available upon request from the student or their parent or guardian. This is an important measure to make sure that every child has their nutritional needs met by our school programs. While cow's milk is an excellent source of nutrition for many children, it's essential that an alternative be available to children for whom consuming cow's milk is not an option. Lactose intolerance is particularly prevalent among students of color, and our nutrition programs need to reflect our values when it comes to meeting children's needs. Importantly, this amendment does not impact H.R. 1147's ability to make whole milk available to students, and instead adds a complementary provision to address students' needs. And so I'd urge a yes vote on my motion, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for roll call.
Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach.
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey.
No.
Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Roy.
No.
Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy.
No.
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse.
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total. Oh, the gentleman from Texas been recorded?
No.
No.
Mr. Burgess, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 8 nays.
And the noes have it, the amendment's not agreed to. Are there any additional amendments? Hearing no request for further amendments, the question's on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
As for roll call.
Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach.
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey.
Aye.
Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Roy.
Aye.
Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy.
Aye.
Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon.
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse.
Yes.
Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
No.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 4 nays.
And the ayes have it. The motion report's agreed to. Accordingly, Ms. Fishbach will be managing the rule for the majority.
And Ms. Scanlon for the minority.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your patience this evening, and we are adjourned.